A historic painting of two Tahitian girls by French artist Paul Gauguin has sold for a record $300 million, making it the most expensive work of art ever sold.
But some critics say that this period of his life has become so romanticised in France that perhaps it ignores some uncomfortable realities.
What most people know about Paul Gauguin is that he used to live with Vincent van Gogh for a couple of weeks in 1888, and it didn't go well at all. Gauguin drove Vincent crazy, and Vincent started to plot the murder of Gauguin, but instead he cut off a piece of his ear, and the story became legendary. But Gauguin is a famous painter in his own right, and the difference between the two becomes clear if we take a look at one of his paintings from that era. As you can see, Gauguin painted Vincent at work, and Gauguin didn't know it back then, but he's actually documenting an important moment in art history here, since Van Gogh's sunflowers became iconic. There's a few things that I want to take from that story and that painting. First, it's important to know that Gauguin was a difficult man. The second, which you can see immediately, is that Vincent and Gauguin shared a similar style. But the key difference is that Vincent was more interested in landscapes and still lifes, whereas Gauguin had an intense interest in people. And that will define the painting that we are looking at today. This is what Gauguin is famous for. Beautiful, naked women. Lots of them. Gauguin lived an adventurous life which brought him to many places. His favorite was living on exotic islands like Martinique and Tahiti, where he painted most of these pictures. In his time, these paintings were understood as glorified windows into the mysterious and unknown life on the French colonies. But when his paintings really started to sell in the 1910s and 20s, Gauguin was seen as a champion of Post-Impressionism and, ironically, a feminist. But times have changed, and they have not been kind to Gauguin. Today, he is an arrogant, overrated, patronizing pedophile. What happened? In one word, the 60s happened. I want to keep the academic part of this video short, so you will have to forgive me for some grave generalizations now. But in the 60s, two major things happened. Many of the former colonies of the world, especially in Africa, became independent. Meanwhile, in the West, there was a rise of feminist activism, which actually made it into the mainstream. These two societal shifts manifested themselves at universities in the form of two new schools of thought: Post-Colonial criticism and Feminist criticism. If we have to boil down these two to a single focus, it would be bringing in new perspectives. If until the 1960s history was his story, then Feminist criticism wants to pay attention to female perspectives, female artists, and important for us, the representation of femininity. If colonial history was written by European colonizers, then post-colonial criticism wants to add perspectives of the colonized to the history books and do away with some of the racial stereotypes and straight-up lies that it perpetuated. It would be foolish and misleading to define feminist and post-colonial strains of criticism by what they oppose, and I do not want to do that, but if we had to define what these two schools hate most, it's Paul Gauguin. This is Thea Amana from Tahiti. She's 13 years old, and technically she was Gauguin's wife. In the grand scheme of things, however, she was just one of the many relations Gauguin had to underage girls, and that is all outside of his wife in Paris, together with his kids. Do you see these rooms, together with the Aboriginal paintings on the wall? That's fake. They don't exist in Tahitian culture. And by the way, if you look at Gauguin's paintings, you might be led to believe that Tahitian girls usually run around naked, which is also a lie. Christian missionaries had arrived on the French colonies long before Gauguin got there, so they were looking actually more like this. It's based on these grounds that the modern sensibility wants to condemn Gauguin, but I want to add a few perspectives in defense of Gauguin because it really is not that simple. Except for the pervy parts, perhaps. I'm not going to touch that. It is what it is. However, the first thing I want you to do is to just look at the paintings. Gauguin's women are beautiful. They're confident, calm, loving life. And what it tells me is that Gauguin had the utmost respect for these people. Yes, his representation is more of a fantasy than reality, but he painted these paintings from a place of admiration. They are love letters. They are what he liked most in people in general. People criticize Gauguin for calling the natives savages, but he called himself a savage and he did so with pride. That's because in Europe Gauguin always felt like an outsider, and it's on these islands that he found what came closest to home for him, and he felt a sense of kinship and belonging with these people. And I think it shows in the happy lives that he portrays in his paintings. So far I talked a lot about how these paintings are understood today, but I want to go back and take a look at how these paintings used to be read and what a tremendous positive impact they had on the people who beheld them. Point in case is Virginia Woolf and her sister Vanessa Bell. The two went to see the first Post-Impressionist exhibition in England, which was in 1910, and what they saw was not the noble savage or erotic fantasies. They looked at Gauguin's paintings and they saw naked women completely unashamed of their bodies. They saw women breastfeeding their children in public. They saw women providing for themselves by fishing or picking fruit. So what they saw was an alternative to the oppressive Victorian culture that they hated so much. Inspired by this, Virginia Woolf and Vanessa Bell dressed up as Tahitian girls. They blackened their skin and put on very loose, semi-naked clothes and went to a ball, which caused an enormous outrage. But it just goes to show how these paintings were some form of social rebellion or even feminism. And that's not just what Vanessa and Virginia read into those paintings, it's actually what Gauguin tried to express by these paintings. So Strindberg and Gauguin got into a little bit of a fight one day, and they were discussing a painting of Gauguin which showed Adam and Eve. And if you take a look, Eve does not look like a blonde white girl, she looks a lot like a Tahitian girl. And usually Eve is the one who is turned away in shame because she brought about the fall of paradise. But look, in this particular instance, who is turned away? It's Adam. And from the letters we know what Gauguin wanted to say. Strindberg told Gauguin that he prefers the traditional Renaissance-style rendering of Eve, to which Gauguin replied, "The Eve of your civilized conception makes us nearly all misogynists. Only the Eve I have painted can stand naked before us. Yours would always be shameless in this natural state, and if beautiful, the source of pain and evil." In other words, how Europe depicts Eve, the ideal, the first woman, is always attached to guilt and shame and moral ideas, whereas his paintings show a very free and open reality. But in all this debate, it's important, I think, to preserve your innocent look on these paintings and just look at them for what they are. They're really beautiful. And I think they have a lot to tell, and they can inspire and be a source of great joy. Would I have liked Gauguin the person? Probably not. But when I look at what he's telling me through these paintings, we get along just fine. And I think that's all that matters.